So we are now recording, and everybody is muted with permission to unmute themselves, and let me begin. Okay, I want to welcome those of you who are here, those of you who are watching one day in the future via video, to this webinar hosted by the Freehof Institute for Progressive Halakhah. It's the first in what we hope will be a long-running series entitled Reform Halakhah Live. Today's topic is the high holidays, live or recorded. I'm Rabbi Mark Washofsky, the chair of the Freehof Institute. Participating along with me today are Rabbi Leon Morris, the president of Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies in Jerusalem, Cantor Yvon Shore, director of Liturgical Arts at HUC-JIR Cincinnati campus, and Rabbi Jeremy Weisblatt, the treasurer of the Freehof Institute and the rabbi of Temple Ohav Shalom in Allison Park, Pennsylvania. During this coronavirus pandemic, many synagogues, particularly non-Orthodox ones, have moved their worship services online. Now, this technology that allows us to do that presents some interesting opportunities and challenges to the rabbis, cantors, and lay leaders who are responsible for organizing these services. One of the opportunities / challenges is our subject today. The ability to pre-record and to play back sections of the liturgy is particularly useful to us as we try to create and produce aesthetically satisfying worship experiences for our communities. This is especially true as we think about planning services for the Yamim Noraim, where our musical arrangements in particular become more complex. Now that's the opportunity, but the opportunity poses a challenge to the traditional Jewish conception of the nature of Tefillah B'Tzibur, of what it means to daven together as a community. Now, in what follows, Leon and I will focus briefly upon some aspects of this challenge. Our goal is not to tell anyone that they should or shouldn't pre-record parts of the high holiday liturgy, chas v'chalila, but simply to help us all think about and talk about this question Jewishly and not only aesthetically. And by Jewishly, of course, we mean halakhically, since halakha is the language through which Judaism traditionally has defined such things as, well, tefillah and tefillah b'tzibur. So following that, Yvon and Jeremy will discuss some of the practical elements of this opportunity / challenge from the perspective of two professionals who are planning high holiday services as we speak. If you got questions, if you're attending right now, there's a chat room, of course, in Zoom. And if you're looking at this later, you can always send us an email. Our address is freehofinfo, that's one word, freehofinfo@gmail.com. You can visit our Facebook page and leave a comment there, or visit our website at www.freehofinstitute, that's one word, freehofinstitute.org. Okay. Let me now start. I'm going to share my screen to present to us one of the one of the issues. I think some folks are trying to get into our meeting, but we're just going to have to wait. One of the major halachic issues.
Mark, if you want to make me co-host, I'll monitor that and let people in from the waiting room.
Okay, so how can I do that really quickly?
Go down to the bottom, participants, and then over my name, there's an option for more. And
okay, just a second, we're going to have to stop sharing. All right, sorry. More, and I'm going to make you. All right, looks like we're making you the host. Okay.
Co-host.
Well, I don't see co-host, so you are now the host. Okay. So you just let people in. All right. All right. So now you've got to let me share my screen.
Okay. We'll how do I do that?
That's a good question.
I think I have to make you host again.
You can make him a co-host, or
I can't. I could not find.
you want to just make me host and I'll moderate it? Would that be easier?
Okay, great. Let me do that.
Got it. And this is all part of live or pre-recorded.
Exactly. Okay, so may I?
Got it.
Okay, let me share my screen, host.
Okay, hold on one second.
I don't see that option though, Jeremy.
You should be able to now share your screen.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Okay, as we were saying, we are, what's the issue, live or pre-recorded? Well, the basic halachic issue is summarized in a very terse one-sentence statement in the Shulchan Aruch, in the very section having to do with Hilchot Rosh Hashanah, as we think about Tekiyat Shofar in particular, where the Shulchan Aruch states the klal in this way: Kol she'eno michuyav b'davar le'eno motzi acherim yedei chovatan. One who is not obligated, does not have a chiyuv to fulfill a particular obligation or requirement, cannot help others fulfill that obligation. The Mishnah Brura comment at the bottom of the page here, and we'll expand that a little bit, simply talks about the fact that the person with the chiyuv is somebody who shares in that particular requirement, even if that individual has already fulfilled that mitzvah. They may help others fulfill the mitzvah. The point is that you have to have the chiyuv in the first place to help others be yotze, to fulfill their requirement. To help others be yotze, well, that's the job traditionally, classically, of the shaliach tzibur. It's the job of the Baal Koreh, the Torah reader. It's the job of the Baal Tekiyah, the person who sounds the shofar. These are individuals who perform actions that other people are required to participate in and help those other people fulfill their obligation. So the word chiyuv, while it obviously troubles some Reform Jews, of course, who don't like to think about religion as obligation, we could talk about that some other time, but I'd like us to think about the word chiyuv as simply defining the community of those individuals who are involved in the mitzvah today. That is, if you and I share a chiyuv, what that means is that we both have a mitzvah to do today. Today, on Rosh Hashanah, that's the day we have a mitzvah to hear the shofar. If we heard it yesterday, well, it wasn't a mitzvah yesterday. If we hear it next week, it's not a mitzvah next week. It's a mitzvah today. Not all of us are going to sound the shofar, but we can all listen to the Baal Tekiyah, who will sound it for us and thereby fulfill our mitzvah through that person. In the same way, the Shaliach Tzibur helps us fulfill our mitzvah by davening aloud, by saying the brachot, to which we can say Amen. Obviously, it's better for everybody to recite their own prayer, but if you don't and you listen to your Shaliach, who is your agent, your representative, you fulfill it that way. The fact that the two of you share a chiyuv is what makes it possible for there to be a commonality, a tzibur, a group of people fulfilling this mitzvah at the same time. It's what allows one individual to help the other to recite a bracha or to perform an action to help another person fulfill their mitzvah. So here is the issue in a nutshell with pre-recorded liturgy. A piece of liturgy or some action that is recorded yesterday or last week was recorded by people who at the time had no chiyuv to perform a particular mitzvah at the moment that they pronounced those words. If somebody sounds the shofar and records it last week, they're simply making noises on a ram's horn. They're not fulfilling the mitzvah of Tekiyat Shofar or Lishmoa Kol Shofar. In the same way, somebody who records the tefillah and says the Chatima Mikadesh Yisrael v'Yom HaZikaron, or this year Mikadesh HaShabbat v'Yisrael v'Yom HaZikaron, but they were saying it yesterday, are simply pronouncing words. They were not fulfilling a mitzvah at that moment. what allows them to be part of the community that fulfills mitzvot for each other, that is the tzibur that is praying together, is that they share the chiyuv at the same time. They exist in the same moment. That's the significance of this term chiyuv for us. So in thinking about pre-recording segments of Rosh Hashanah liturgy or high holiday liturgy, one of the things we want to think about is this notion of, well, which elements of the tefillah, of the liturgical experience, fall into the category of chiyuv, that is mitzvot that are limited to today, that need to be performed today, so that they need to be done by a community existing right now in this moment. Not every aspect of the liturgy falls in that category. Some of us were talking last week about the fact that Kol Nidre, which of course everybody, it's not Yom Kippur, it's not the night of Yom Kippur without Kol Nidre, but Kol Nidre is not a halachic obligation, not a chiyuv in the traditional sense. You don't have to hear it in order to fulfill some mitzvah. There is absolutely no hindrance to pre-recording the Kol Nidre and playing it back. Whereas other parts of the liturgy which partake of that notion of chiyuv really do, in a sense, traditionally require the presence of everybody together in the same moment. So now that we've gotten over the strangeness of being together via digital technology, electronic technology, the question is whether we're going to demand for ourselves the same togetherness in time. That is, are we together at this moment, as live as we can be, even though we're not present physically in the same immediate physical space? To the extent that we do, this concept of chiyuv is an important one, and it's one that we need to take into account as we make our plans for what we're going to do live and what we're going to do pre-recorded on the high holidays. All right, and now I'll turn it over to Leon.
Thank you, Yashakah. Thank you so much, Mark. I admit to all kinds of biases against a recorded service. A friend of mine who I was discussing this with said, it's kind of like the difference between theater and film. And tefillah is much more theater because you're responding to the kihila that's present. There's something alive, something that's happening, something that is responsive. And I'm thinking about the way in which the tefillot are modeled according to Masechet Brachot and other sources over the korbanot. And there was a certain aspect of aliveness and unpredictability with the korbanot. You weren't absolutely sure that your sacrifice would be accepted. It's not all wrapped up and perfect. But in looking for categories to think about the recorded blessing, when can a blessing be said not at its proper time and not be considered a bracha levatala, a blessing in vain? I'd like to look for a few moments at the category of l'shem chinuch. When a blessing is said, we'll look at the sources in a moment, some of the sources. When a blessing is said for the purpose of educating others, as we'll see, even when you say the tetragrammaton, even when you say God's name and you say the blessing, you don't say Hashem Elokeinu, you actually say it with God's name. It's not considered a bracha levatala if the purpose is to teach classically children, but we'll talk about that, how to say the blessings themselves. So I want to look at some of those texts with you. And Jeremy's going to just post into the chat, or he might have done that already, just a Safaria link for later on. But now I'll just do share screen. Are you seeing the correct text? Yes, okay. So Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Here the context is blessings that are said by someone who already said the blessings for themselves. So just before this particular passage, they're discussing Kiddush. And here we're discussing, could someone say the blessing, could someone say hamotzi over bread if he's not eating with them? And so generally, we see Tanu Rabbanan in this Breita that one should not say the blessing over bread for guests unless he's eating with them. But, and here's the exception, he may break bread, meaning he may say hamotzi for his children and for other members of his household in order to educate them to perform the mitzvot. And the Ritva, in trying to, I think, express the halachic parameters here, is saying the bracha, the prohibition of bracha levatala is d'Rabbanan. And when the second commandment, Al tisa et shem Adonai Elohecha l'shav, is cited, that's really an asmachta. It's additional support, but it's really a d'Rabbanan kind of category. So he's explaining here in the Talmudic passage we just looked at, they permit him to say the blessings in order to teach his children. If this was a prohibition of the Torah, if this wasn't just, if a bracha levatala was a prohibition of the Torah and not just a prohibition of the rabbis, they never would have permitted him to do this for the purpose of education. So I'm fascinated for these purposes of our discussion of this notion of l'shem chinuch. We'll look at a couple other passages. One is from the Shulchan Aruch. One is not to answer amen after a minor when they explicitly are learning the blessing before their teacher, when they're sitting with their rabbi learning it. Whereas it is permitted to teach minors the blessings in their full form, even though they are saying a blessing in vain, a bracha levatala, at the time of their study. And the Mishnah Brura on this, commenting on bracha levatala, he says it wants to say that when a teacher studies the blessings with them, not at their proper time, it is even permitted to mention the name of God, and even the teacher can mention the name in order to teach minors the blessings, because we're compelled to teach children in order to educate them to study Torah and observe mitzvot, as it says, and you shall teach them to your children. So there are a few other sources, additional sources that I didn't have time to translate that are on that link. Let me stop sharing for a moment. So what are the implications? What would be the implications of saying that in essence a congregation that does a pre-recorded video could be considered l'shem chinuch? And I think that it raises some interesting educational issues. Do we, in the recording that we're providing, the non-live service, do we empower those who are watching to say the blessings for themselves? Does the rabbi or Cantor say, okay, now, those of you that are watching, I want you to repeat after me, so you can experience the power of this moment on this day. I'm recording it in advance, but I want you to say the following bracha for yourself. That would be an approach. Videos aimed at making the viewer, making the congregant, an active rather than a passive participant. How could we, if we're invoking the halachic notion of l'shem chinuch for saying a blessing not at its proper time, how do we use our limited airtime to teach rather than to perform? To move them by what they will now do with the help of this video and not by what they're watching. A colleague shared a situation in which he felt pressured to record pre-record a high holiday service and wasn't comfortable with it for many of the reasons that have been mentioned. And he wrote to me that the part that he recorded, he wrote, I didn't do any of the prayers themselves, but rather just teachings. And he asks, as a friend and a colleague, I wonder whether you think there's a halachic difference between iyunei tefillah, explanations of the prayers, and leading the liturgy itself. And I think, indeed, using this category of l'shem chinuch, there is a big difference. I think that there could be a use of a pre-recorded video l'shem chinuch, which isn't about trying to give the individuals the experience that they would have had in the synagogue sanctuary, but rather a pre-recorded video for something different, something that leaves our congregants more educated, more empowered, and more actively involved. And then it's a video l'shem chinuch.
Leon, thank you. Yasher koach. And now it's time to turn the program over to Cantor Shore and Rabbi Weisblatt. Yvon and Jeremy are going to be talking about the whole question of live versus Memorex. And some of you are old enough to remember that. From the standpoint, well, from a very practical standpoint, from people who are actually doing this, as many of you who are here now and who may eventually be listening to this are. So please, you guys take it away.
So Yasher koach, Mark and Leon, thank you. Cantor Shore, it's a pleasure to be able to engage in this conversation with you. As we spoke, preparing this, I had the pleasure of sitting in on one of the continuing education classes at the CCR convention last year in Cincinnati. And so we kind of met from afar in the classroom, but now it's nice to engage in this sacred conversation about how do we take kind of what Mark and Leon have said and our own experiences leading congregations out there, what's going on in this new COVID world. So if you want to start, kind of introduce your location, your shul, provide some background, I'll provide some background on my shul, and then why don't we get into this conversation?
Thank you so much, and I'm really truly honored to be here, and it's actually quite humbling. So this year I'm serving congregation Achdut Shalom in Fort Wayne, Indiana. This is a merger congregation between a Reform community and a conservative community. They also have a freshly minted rabbi straight off of the LA campus. So, and it's a brand new merger as well. And it's their second year using Mishkan HaNefesh. So everything's just perfect. It's just, no issues whatsoever. So we've spent a great deal of time over the summer beginning talking about acclimating the communities just in general, much less all the realities of COVID. I'm also, as Rabbi Washofsky said, Director of Liturgical Arts and Music at Cincinnati, which means that I'm also the point person to help prepare all of our students towards their high holiday pulpits. And we have been discussing these issues and elements, and I've been holding twice weekly workshops for our students all summer long on this. So everything that we are discussing and then some has come up. And so I'm very grateful again for this opportunity, but that's just to give you a little bit of background where I am. Though I sit in the college, it is not from the place of the ivory tower. I'm very much in this with you, with all of us who are engaging with active communities right now and their concerns and their real needs.
Thank you, Cantor. So in a similar position, I'm out there in the pulpit world. My congregation is in Allison Park, which is pretty much here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it too is a blended shul founded of Reform, conservative, and some people who still claim an Orthodox tradition that they at least grew up in, but no longer subscribe to that. It's also a shout out to Leon in his old backyard, still very proudly representing, although still a Philly sports fan. And what we're grappling with those same issues. I've had the pleasure, I'm now in my 4th year here, where we've used Mishkan HaNefesh since I started, but we have a cantorial intern for the first time in many years who's bringing those experiences that you're talking about right now, Cantor, that you're teaching, and so she's bringing it to our discussions, trying to figure out what it is that we're going to do for our community. And I also have the benefit, I sit on the Responsa committee currently and have been a part of those discussions about permissibility of Zoom on Shabbat and holidays and Minyan and what do we do with B'nai Mitzvah. So I'm seeing it from this intellectual perspective, from what do our people need to hear, where are we going, and then also what works in our own shul. And the more and more I keep hearing is that, similar to what Mark introduced us with, is we're not trying to give necessarily an answer to this, because I really believe each community is going to take its own direction, is made up in its own way. But the experiences that you and I are going through right now, I think, are really helpful, as Leon also suggested, of addressing those colleagues who are, well, I don't feel comfortable with this 100% or that. And I'm kind of in this moment where I believe that I don't know if we're 100% comfortable in any of this. And so we're really charting a new path forward, and what has guided me mostly, and so let's get into this discussion, is really, I don't believe in replicating, as Leon said, the experience of the shul pre-COVID. I think if we try to do that, for me, that's a failure. And that I want to take advantage of the silver lining of whatever this is to present things in a radical new way that I think can engage our congregants that maybe we didn't have the possibility to do because people expected, right? High Holy Days, I show up to shul, there's a certain way to come, there's a certain way it's going to be. Maybe it's Mishkan and Nefesh, maybe it's, Gates of Red, maybe it's the gender neutral, maybe not. But, right, there's that certain, process that's all gone out the window. So, Cantor, please.
So maybe a bit of a background. I mean, because we understand that Halakhah itself is an adaptive response, right, to meet the needs of the community. And, in terms of the practical side of this, part of the communication that I've given to the congregation and to our students, that throughout Jewish history, we have altered our practices, at times severely, especially when faced with great peril. So the overarching inyan, obviously, what we're talking about today, chiyuv l'shem chinuch, but really to look at this in terms of pikuach nefesh, right? We know that we're dealing with at-risk groups, so it's our responsibility as clergy to help guide and help the communities to take the precautions. So be it Zoom or live stream, this is a given. To record or pre-record, right? So Chavre, we know that many congregations have been doing this from the start, possibly those of you who are on the call right now or tuning in. And along with L'Shem Chinuch, what has spurred this is many creative innovations that we've seen that is so exciting. And Jeremy, this is what you're talking about, right? Having the idea, the opportunity to really create something new. So I want to push back just slightly, because, if we were Jews and we agreed with everything, something would be off kilter about this concept of aesthetic, though. And I think with this, if we look to Shemot 15:2, where the inyan of Hidur mitzvah comes from, the beautification of a mitzvah. And I realize all the rabbis here are going to jump on me and say, oh, that has to do with ritual objects. That's about the beautification of ritual objects. And you are correct. But the element from Shemot is the glorification of God, right? It is, this is my God, and I will glorify God. So then Talmud goes on to develop this concept around Hidur mitzvah. And so to reproduce a choir or an instrumental ensemble, or even a cantorial moment with accompaniment, this is not trying to reproduce the exact moment in tefillah as we would experience. However, this is how many people express their Jewishness, if they're part of the choir, if they're part of the instrumental ensemble. So what do? One that is absolutely prohibitive on Zoom, and because of the health concerns, via live stream. Therefore, free recording is the choice. And the underlying intent is what drives this. I had a conversation offline with Rabbi Washofsky about this in terms of timing. So not so much chiyuv in terms of, Kriyat Shema and those issues, but the pressure that Shlichei Sibor feel all the time, and Jeremy, I'm sure you experience this as well, from the pulpit. The clock is always in our background and sometimes in the foreground. And quite honestly, free recording alleviates the pressure that we may feel in that moment. Leon, I could not agree with you more in terms of presenting a video in a way, or pre-recording in a way that empowers the Kihila to gain insight and gain a moment of connection through education and action that they can take from it, so too do I believe pre-recording gives the moment of tefillah with an inspiration. So if we are dropping due to a Zoom call, if that affects people's ability to actually engage with worship, then by all means, at least elements of pre-recording, I do think comes into play, and how it comes into play in terms of involving the community, dafka, involving different honorees that you may not be able to do via Zoom or live stream, in a way that also affords them the time to think about it. When we know that when we parse out opportunities for communal participation, let's say within a worship setting, people are very nervous oftentimes, right? They're thinking, oh, I'm going to have to say the bracha over the Torah. And the entire time they're concentrating on that, rather than being present, ironically, in the moment. Were we to pre-record an aliyah or moments of again, to feature and acknowledge those individuals within our communities who give so much all year long, or are in great need or have suffered right now, to give them the time and the comfort in their own home, perhaps to create their own prayerful expression. I think these are valuable ways to not only justify pre-recording, but to utilize this. And it does not negate the intensity and the intention that underlines tefillah. And in full disclosure, I'll end with this to turn it back over to Jeremy. We are doing a hybrid. Some elements are pre-recorded, some elements are not. Some elements, dafka, are going to be by Zoom, some are going to be by live stream, and others will be experiences where there's a lot of education going. I'm thinking specifically Yom Kippur afternoon, the experience that we're going to be offering. So we're trying to hit all the different levels of need given our realities.
Cantor, sure, thank you. I appreciate the pushback a little bit, so it gives me a chance to kind of clarify what I'm saying. And you hit on something that I'll never forget from Larry Hoffman's class on ritual, which is the purpose of ritual is to take us, he taught, from A to B, right? We should be moved after we enter. We should leave a different person in some way, shape, or form. And I think by you saying the pre-recorded, that there are certain ways to keep that aesthetic, I think is very important. I think there has to be some sort of aesthetic. And to clarify, I'm saying recreating the entire system the way we've had it, I don't think can happen in today's world. I think that's what's difficult. And you hit on some things of pre-recorded and the idea of pikuach nefesh. And that's really where my community is coming from, and l'shem hinuch. So to start, we're not having anyone in the sanctuary, right? And we're going to go with a similar hybrid model. But what is going to be those pre-recorded pieces? So one of the things, I'll give an example of how we put in, is it's really important to our past presidents, and I know this is not just our shul, but a lot of other shuls, to pass down the Torah, right? You got to pass down the Torah on Kol Nidre. It's as if it's Halakhah, right? It's not, right? As Mark talked about it, this is not Halakhah, but you tell someone it's not, and they're like, are you a rabbi, right? Are you a Cantor? Do you know what you're talking about? So no. But what we've decided to do, I came up with an idea instead to have our presidents pre-record a 30-second message of what being a Jew means to them and being a part of their community, and going from the last president to the current president and playing that first. So it's as if they're passing Dafka Torah down from generation to generation and then going into Kol Nidre. So what I've done is I've tried to take Larry Hoffman's essence of ritual and say, what are those parts of the tefillah drama that could be recreated in a new way? And it also preserves voices of our community for posterity, right? That we could look back on and use them for other teaching experiences to really engage people in a whole new way that they've never thought of before in the High Holy Day experience. And so while I kind of follow with Leon more of, I don't like this idea of pre-recording. There's something to the drama. I want to be present. I want to feel like I'm davening with the people. And again, I sent out a survey saying, how long will you listen to a recorded service, whether it's recorded or live stream? And the answer is roughly an hour and a half to 2. I had one person who said 4 hours. God bless them. But I think it really leads to something that you're really hitting on, is we have to keep some of the aesthetic. I think that is certainly a part of this discussion that can't be forgotten. And when we do that, what pieces of the liturgy could we pre-record? Now, our option in my community is the Cantorial intern and I have decided to not pre-record almost anything, that we're going to practice, and God willing, Zoom and technology will work. But that's part of the drama, so to speak, if it doesn't work. But we're going to be doing almost all of it live, as well as some in-person experiences, because that's what we feel is going to work for this community. And I can tell you, while the community said to me, Rabbi, do what choice you want, the minute I did start to say pre-recorded in a ritual meeting, there was some pushback. I could tell because of the makeup of my community. And I think that's part of where we're going, is what you shared and others so far have said, which is because our communities are all so different, right? We're all Reform shuls, and yet we're not, right? What does Reform mean in our shul is different than other shuls here in Pittsburgh. So how do we take these lessons of L'Shem Hinuch, of Pikuach Nefesh, of Chiyuv, and obligation, and say, how can we create a system, I really believe, that works for my shul? And that's the point, right? It works for our sacred community that I think more than ever we need to be there for, and bring them into this High Holy Day drama and this teaching, and give a sense of community and connection. And I'll be honest, in a B'nai Mitzvah that I'm having this Shabbos, I'm relying on the Shem Hinuch for certain things in order to create that drama and the experience for the student, because I know I want him to have some of that emotional impact that I think would be missing if I didn't add in some of those brachot, because it is a Zoom service, and if I fully relied on what we used to rely on, that I don't think can be in what I'm now terming a Yavne moment. I really believe we're in this moment, and I've said before privately that we are, maybe a shadow of the rabbis and our community leaders of 2,000 years ago, who have to make the choice of temple's gone, what do we do? In a sense, right, the building is gone, what do we do? And how do we make sure Judaism continues for 2,000 years? It doesn't look the same, right? Moshe Rabbeinu sitting in the back of Akiva's Beit Midrash, but yet he hears the word. He knows this too is tradition. So I see a message. Cantor, I want to make sure if you have another word or two to share. And then after that, I think the four of us would love to open up to questions that people watching right now may have.
So just a comment in terms of one of the places where we did pre-record and the rationale behind it. So we're thinking about the true meaning of Yizkor for a community, and knowing that the development of Yizkor as a whole, when we look at Av HaRachamim, which is no longer part of our Yizkor liturgy, right? But there's an understanding, or there's a thought, scholar academically, that much of this liturgy perhaps was developed during the time of the Crusades, right? So Av HaRachamim, and ironically, in original Yizkor, Kaddish Tom is not part of it. Actually, El Male, Av HaRachamim, and there's one other that I don't know why it's escaping. Oh, Yizkor, hello, Yizkor itself, Yizkor Elohim, yeah. So this, as we would engage with this in a congregational setting, we know that Yizkor itself is silent, right? We also have strong Minhag HaMakom, which is more Baba Maisa for those individuals who don't participate in Yizkor, because of this thought that if I have a parent who's still alive, I cannot participate. I can't be part of this. Yeah. In speaking about this and saying, wait a second, at this moment when there is so much loss in the world, our opportunity, our Jewish calendar gives us this moment to reflect dafka on loss, to come together as a community and reflect on loss. So therefore, what are the psalm texts? What are the meditations? What are the ways that we can combine this moment of being together in time and yet allowing for space within the individual reflection? And so therefore, we have created these kind of modules, if you will, through Yizkor. It is one consistent space, but there is music playing in ways with teachings that have led in, with explanations, allowing those individuals who are online to just be in the moment, to have the music wash over them, and to be engaged truly in the reflection of those who are no longer with us, and not only within their own families, but within the greater human family, if you will. So this was the first explanation behind this pre-recording. And I would say of everything that we're doing, Yizkor is the one place where I actually would encourage people to think about that for a means of pre-recording. Here too, the level of emotion that this could impact our communities this year beyond all others, to allow them then their own time and their own moment in privacy, yes, to be connected, but to engage in that emotional response and to be vulnerable and to not feel like they're on camera or that they have to keep up necessarily with something. So I do think that in terms of meeting the emotional and supportive needs in the community in this regard, this might be a way that might seem counterintuitive with the whole stumbling block or hesitancy or understanding rationale to not pre-record. But I think this might be an entree into that that will yield really positive results and open up the opportunities for our community.
Okay, listen, thank you so much, Jeremy and Yvon, for really putting this this question, which is both theoretical and quite practical, in that very practical, immediate perspective, having to do with our job as Clay Kodesh or leaders of services. What are we called upon to do right now as religious leaders in a situation such as this? I know that when the COVID crisis first began, it seems like many, many years ago now, but it was really February and March. Jewish communities across the spectrum had to face, each one in its own way, the question of how much do we adjust? How much can we adjust our practice, our ritual practice, given the realities of the situation? How much can we imitate what or reconstruct what there was before? Can we fully migrate online everything that we could do live? And the phrase that was bandied about, properly so, was Shat HaHUC. It's an emergency situation, which we all know. And we know that traditionally that claim, Shat HaHUC, is used to justify in the halachic literature, both in the classical period, during the mission of the Talmud, as well as ever since. If it is truly a Shat HaHUC, then we are entitled to do things that we would never imagine doing otherwise. Well, of course, the question is, well, if you can say Shat HaHUC, that's talk about an axe that you can use to chop down everything. You can justify anything under that heading. So the question, what limitation? How do you think about this? How do you apply that very powerful tool in such a way that you are still pledging your allegiance to some of the basic rubrics of Jewish practice, halachic thinking, the way we normally understand what it means to pray together as a community, to read Torah together, and now to hear the shofar together. And up at the Freehof website, we do have we do have a discussion of how the different movements have sought to deal with this question, each one in its own way. How far does Shat HaHUC go to justify changes? And we're still obviously working this out. We on the progressive end of the spectrum seem to be we think we can go farther. We allow ourselves to think more creatively. But even we are going to have to think about how far does that go before it's gone too far. We may not even see the lines before we get right up to them. This is one of the things we're dealing with here today. I wonder, I want to throw this open to questions if anybody here on the webinar today has them, and if not, we will refer those questions to later on through email communications and so forth. Anybody, questions for anybody or for each other?
I would love an opportunity, if I can, and just very quickly to say how wonderful it is to see my friend and classmate Jeremy, and of course to see my predecessor and teacher, Rabbi Leon, who will understand the peculiarities of my congregation better than anybody. And he will be even probably more surprised to find out that in an hour I'm having a conversation with incoming new president, co-presidents, one of which he knows and otherwise, which is a radical shift for us. So The question about pre-recording, and I really appreciate all of the nuance that's been brought in, and the last issue, the Mark, that you brought up about, where the line is and how we are very careful about what our overriding logic is around how we're going to relate to this. But to be specific, I hadn't even thought really of pre-recording anything other than the aliyot for the Torah, which are normally, as in most congregations, given out to a combination of important people, and actually a wonderful tradition that I think Leon started, that we've reserved the last two aliyahs for people who've lost somebody this year and somebody who, if we've gained anybody in the family. But obviously those have import beyond just the service itself in terms of recognizing people in the congregation, which I'm sure we can all understand. And the second is the appeal, which, as you can imagine, right now for many congregations is very significant. And so I had the thought that at the very least I could sort of wrap my head around the idea of, live streaming the service, and if I could figure out the technological ability to intersperse only in those moments where it applies. But of course, as we were talking about the question of chiyuv and the question of, is a pre-recorded blessing for the reading of the Torah acceptable under these circumstances, I'll put that to the side for a second. Let's assume that I'm not comfortable with. What does one do in this circumstance in which, if we want to read Torah, but it is like in our circumstance, I'm going to be in the sanctuary, my student Cantor will be in the sanctuary, our accompanist will be in the sanctuary, and as a single fixed camera live streaming. What does one do, right? In other words, do I just then repeatedly give the aliyah for each of the 7 aliyot the first day of Rosh Hashanah, or do the Cantor and I go back and forth? Is there an alternative that allows for a situation in which the only two people who are capable in the space of doing the blessings? I've never been in a circumstance where you run out of people before. So I was just wondering whether there is any halakhic basis for that. Is there anything that I can think of? Could I look at it sort of as an opening bracha, like the blessing before reading, before the beginning of the entire Torah reading, and then a blessing at the end of it, and still have 7 stops along the way, or one gigantic long Torah reading that doesn't end? Any advice that either you or Leon or anybody else might have about how to approach that? I hope that question made sense, because everything else I think you've given me great clarity. But this is the one I just want to have in my back pocket in case I can't figure out a way to have pre-recorded stuff, and we do it only live, what one does in that circumstance. And I'm sure that there's no precedent for this in any case. But
there's a few of us who probably haven't. I see Yvon, and then I can tell you what I'm doing right now in the shul if you want.
Yeah, that's all I was going to say. I mean, we are doing a combination. We have pre-recorded and by the way, we are live streaming every service with the exception of HUC-JIR in terms of what we're doing as a service. But because that precludes aliyot, so yes, we are pre-recording the aliyot. They're going around right now and recording this and also, I'm sorry if you can't hear me. If an easy way to do this, Daniel, people can just go on Zoom for themselves and record Zoom, like this is being recorded. We are recording this, or you can set up the Zoom link and give your congregant the link and be on the line with them and hit record. So that's a way for them to actually, a very easy way. And then you have the link, you have the Zoom link that you can give and play, at that point. So that's an easy, low-hanging fruit. If something comes up, the rabbi and I talked about, now this I don't know halachically, but we've also talked about if we have to, trade off, then we'll trade off. But so far that hasn't been an issue.
So what I'm doing, and I've reached out to Mark actually on this, and I keep bugging him for another conversation because I want to go further, because I know there's a bunch of us who are struggling with this. What I've kind of settled on in my shul, and what we're going to do for High Holy Days, and for example, the B'nai Mitzvah I have this weekend, the student is reading from their Chumash. And so people come up live for the Aliyah, but they say La'asok b'divrei Torah, because the essence of the Torah, Kriyat HaTorah, is Talmud Torah. And so they're going to say that, except, but I'm not going to do this for High Holy Days, but just for the Bar Mitzvah, L'Shem Hinuch, what I've done, because it's so emotional for the child, that I've allowed the child to say the actual bracha, because like the first child I was debating and not to, and I could see like the tears on the face, and I just said I can't do that. And so I relied, maybe I shouldn't, but I'm relying on the Shem Hinuch for the bar mitzvah student or bat mitzvah to say for their bracha, but everyone else is just lasok b'divrei Torah. So we're going to pattern that again for Holy Days, where I'll have the scroll open. Someone is actually, we have readers who are going to read, and then we'll have someone who will come on, they'll say lasok b'divrei Torah, then they'll read, and I'm going to follow along, and we're trying to have a Torah cam set up. This is all like, I'm not doing the technology, someone else, thank God, is doing it. And then, so they'll be able to see me follow along in the Torah as the person is reading, and that's how we're handling it. So it's a combination of a number of things to get there, what works for my community.
Yeah, I just want to add that while the long-standing minhag, for many, many centuries now, has been for each oleh and now each oleh or olah to come up and recite their own brachot before their own section of the kriya. If you're using a Sefer Torah, that is. Originally, it seems that the practice was for somebody to say a bracha before the reading, a bracha to be recited at the end of the reading by the last person up, if there was more than one. And then the intermediate sections didn't have brachot. So the chiyuv, as it were, the live chiyuv would be the opening, asher bachar banu, and the closing at the very end, asher natan lanu.
Okay.
And let everybody else do their own thing, in the middle, and that can be pre-recorded if they're too nervous to go live, which,
Right. Well, no, that's extremely helpful. And I remember studying when I was in school, and I just wasn't sure whether that was considered sort of the unacceptable outlier, or whether because there was some precedent for it, I could use it as a framing. Because it just seems to me a lot easier to imagine the idea of an opening and a closing than 7 back and forths amongst people. Just, conceptually that made more sense to me. But I just was sort of curious, and this has been phenomenally helpful. And Leon, especially, if you got anything to help me out. So Leon saved me so many times over the years. This would just be continuing in a long string of experiences. So I would love to hear what your insight is. I'll take it to the bosses.
I'll very sweet words. Thanks.
True words.
But I just wanted to add that tied into this is really this question of, can we constitute a minyan on Zoom? And I think, we've been doing that a lot. And the public reading of Torah with its blessings is in the list of, I was just trying to find it on my Google Drive. Mark, you could probably give us the reference, but it's listed in the Mishnah on the list of those things that you need a minyan for, Devarim Sheva Kedusha. So, but there seems to be something about the ability to respond. Like, think of Kaddish as like the ultimate example of Devarim Sheva Kedusha. And then, so we need a technological way in which people are gathered on Zoom, which means, my wife was saying Kaddish for her mother during the last few months of her saying Kaddish was during COVID. And she was a part of all kinds of minyanim online where they were encouraging you, davka, at like Devarim Sheva Kedusha, to stop muting so that everyone could basically hear everyone else, as cacophonous as that was at certain times. So it may be that a live stream Torah reading is an opportunity somehow for people to make themselves present more than other parts of the service. To be able to hear everyone say Amen to a blessing.
If I may add to that, Leon, really in everything I heard, thank you very much. It's impressive, and also, overseas to hear this. And to admit that up till now in Amsterdam, Netherlands, in our 2,000 people community, we have been doing everything live. And I must say that especially reading from the Torah, we call the people, we give them an aliyah at home, each at home alive. That is a very, very powerful moment where we interact. And I must admit, we wouldn't want that. And we especially, Leon, I must admit, we use this Dvarim B'Kedusha argument that we need to say amen. You need to be able to respond, the Halakhah about Birkat Hamazon, you know, and if you are in the market, etc. So that is, so therefore I like very much, Yvon, your suggestion that to have parts maybe that are pre-recorded, but the fact to be able to interact, to see the emotion. We said from the beginning, the important thing of the service is, the important thing in this time is the interaction, is not only tefillah, is the interaction. And I would even, that was a question I had, because I heard also the theme of aesthetics, but the aesthetics of the live service are just the interaction of the people and the meeting, the looking each other in the eye. So I was wondering, that is a question I would ask, what aesthetics are we talking about? I hope it's not aesthetics of a high resolution image or a better quality sound, because I think that most of the people, you know, if they want that, there is enough of it to download from the internet. That's not what they come to our service for. And to, you know, last word about that is it came in my mind by listening that imagine that one of our beloved ones is very far away and we haven't been in contact, and we have two options. We have an option of a pre-recorded message of our beloved one with this high quality, but from yesterday, or a direct phone call, video call with this person, but with a lower quality, but we can see each other at the moment.
So
what is aesthetics?
So if I may respond, there's a difference between live stream and Zoom. For the congregations who don't have Zoom and they're live streaming, there is no way for that interaction.
Right.
Because it's just, and so that's the difference. And
right.
So when I'm talking about moments, that's why we're truly doing a hybrid. Some things we're doing via Zoom, but we're also concerned that Zoom might drop along the way based on the congregation's history. So some of it we're going to live stream, which within the congregation's history, as they've been doing, they've had better success with actually, you know, having an option of being able to hang with it, if you will, from beginning to end. So with Zoom, absolutely, we have unmuted, and in fact, that's what we've done with HUC the entire year. For that, there have been places throughout Tefillah where we absolutely unmute and we hear the voices. We embrace the cacophony, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I guess just in terms of clarification, specifically if it is live streamed and there is no way to have that interaction back and forth, that's where I'm advocating for certain elements of pre-recording with participation, for individuals to participate, that's all. So, but with Zoom, absolutely, we're not looking for perfection. This is prayer. This is not perfection, and it's certainly not performance.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are right up against our time limit. We're going to have to end this. I would just following up. You know, since I started this, I get to close it. I want to follow this theme of aesthetics up with a passage that that's there on the chat. If you're present right now, when Yvon mentioned Exodus 15 verse 2, Ze'eli v'anvehu, Leon put up the verse in the chat box, and then I went and added to that the Rashi comment to that verse, because Rashi, and if you can't see it right now because you're looking at this later, go look up Rashi to the verse Exodus 15:2. Rashi says, look, I mean, the word anvehu needs to be explained, and there are two ways of explaining it. One of them is in the sense of naveh, that is a place, a makom, so that has implications of the Beit HaMikdash. This is my God, I'm going to go build him a really nice house, okay. But then there's a davar acher, the second vort that Rashi brings. Va'anvehu lashon noi. Okay, so anvehu really means noi, which means beauty, adornment. This gets to the hidur mitzvah concept that Yvon was talking about. Asaper noyo v'shivcho. I'm going to speak. I'm going to talk about the beauty and the praise of God, l'ba'e olam, to everyone within the sound of my voice. Kagon, and a few quotes from Shir HaShirim, Ma dodech midod, and then Dodit Sachva Adom. Aesthetics really is not a foreign category in Jewish prayer. It goes all the way back to this understanding that we have an obligation to make our performance of the mitzvah more beautiful than it might otherwise be. That we understand the importance of that. But then the question is, okay, fine, but what is beauty? How do you define beauty? Well, if you're Plato, of course, the beauty has one single absolute definition, and it's up to your philosopher kings to tell you what that is. If you're anyone but Plato, you probably think, well, you know, beauty is really contextual. What is considered beautiful really depends upon the tradition in which you find yourself, the context, social and cultural, in which you happen to be operating. As Jews, we understand the obligation to, to glorify God, to make our services aesthetically and spiritually pleasing, because that's part and parcel of it. But the way we do that, what counts as beauty, is going to be defined by more traditional conceptions that we have about who we are when we get together as a community to pray. And those conceptions, as we've seen today, have a lot to do with the halachic tradition of tefillah b'tzibur, of things like chiyuv and things that fall outside that category. It's complicated, but it's worth talking about and arguing about and discussing as we face, in about 6-7 weeks now, one of the more dramatic moments of the Jewish year. I'd like to thank all of our participants, Leon, Yvon, Jeremy, all those of you who attended today, and those of you who may be watching at some point in the future. Today is Tu B'Av, so whatever that means to you, enjoy it, and have a good day. Thanks a lot, and we'll say goodbye until the next time we get together for Halakhah Live.